What is up, dudes and dudettes, ladies and gentlemen, goofy goobers? I'm your host, Tom Levinobi. Happy Monday. Welcome to the show. Hope you're having a fantastic Monday. Let me know what you got up to over the weekend in the chat down below. As always, we have Taylor in Nashville.
Made it to platform 9 3/4 on time for today's show.
Indeed you did. I don't know how fond we're going to be of Harry Potter after this whole story, at least the actor himself, Daniel Radcliffe. Today we're going to be talking about J.K. Rowling, circling back on that whole story, on the famous author of the Harry Potter series, talking about her, Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert, is it Grint or Grint? How do you say his last name? Does anybody know?
Grint, I think, yeah.
Okay, Grint. You guys can fact check me on that down below. And talking about this idea of J.K. Rowling being a TERF, all of the things she said about transgenderism and her fight for women's rights, or at least, in my opinion, her fight for women's rights. Because recently, they've all been called out, those actors that I mentioned, and really many others, but those three main ones in particular, by a man named Graham Linehan. And you might know Graham as an Irish writer and a comedian. He's responsible for the shows Father Ted, as well as the IT Crowd, which have become, pretty popular for their, comedic sitcom style. Now, he came out in what I can only call a scathing article about Rupert Grint and Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson because of how they treated J.K. Rowling when she decided to come out and speak for women's rights. So J.K. Rowling famously decided to vocalize her opinions when it came to trans rights, talking about the definition of a woman, the definition of a man, and really gave what I believe to be a reasonable opinion, like most of us have, in regard to biological men transitioning to become women. She's simply saying, you can call yourself a trans woman or a trans man or whatever the case may be, but we need to protect women's spaces. She spoke about legislation that was allowing for trans women in particular to commit attacks against other women. She talked about women's privacy. She talks about women's sports. And the internet got so heated over J.K. Rowling saying this that they just tried to cancel her. They tried to get her out of all the different Harry Potter events that were happening, filmings of movies, and different, stuff that was happening at the parks. They basically said that J.K. Rowling should be separated from her creation that is Harry Potter. Now, of course, the actors were sort of dragged into the turmoil here and had to give statements in regard to what J.K. Rowling had said about trans people and women. Because as soon as one person says something, right, we have to go to the whole group of people who are associated with a certain project that she created to hear about their opinions. Now, I believe Daniel Radcliffe was the most opinionated when it came to what J.K. Rowling said, and we'll read a little bit of his response here. So it says here, quote, "To all the people who now feel that their experience of the Harry Potter books has been tarnished or diminished, I am deeply sorry for the pain these comments have caused you. I really hope that you don't entirely lose what was valuable in these stories to you. If they taught you that strength is found in diversity, and that dogmatic ideas of pureness lead to the oppression of vulnerable groups, if you believe that a particular character is trans, non-binary, or gender fluid, or that they are gay or bisexual, if you found anything in these stories that resonated with you and helped you at any time in your life, then that is between you and the book that you read, and it is sacred. And in my opinion, nobody can touch that." Daniel. It's really interesting that he's talking this way about this project when he is not the creator of the project. It's really interesting to not be the author of the Harry Potter series, but to tell people who have read it, if you think a character is trans, if you think a character is non-binary, if you think a character is queer, then so be it, as if he's created something in this whole series. He really hasn't. He was casted to play Harry Potter, and I guess some could argue that that makes him a vessel of the story and of the book now, and he gets to talk about these things by virtue of being hired in that position. But he certainly is taking a little bit too much credit, in my opinion, in these statements in regard to what J.K. Rowling said. And it's so interesting to watch these actors who are quite literally standing on the shoulders of a giant with J.K. Rowling, who created their entire careers, their livelihoods, their wealth, and hear things like this from them. Now, it's okay, of course, to have your own separate opinion. And if you're an actor who happens to have worked on the Harry Potter series and you disagree with what J.K. Rowling said, by all means, come forward and tell people that you disagree and you don't stand by her statements. That's totally fine, and we'll talk about the many others that have done that. But to speak on her works and how people should be able to interpret them, I think is a whole nother beast in itself. Now, I'm not a fan of Harry Potter. I've only watched, I think, like 2.5 of the Harry Potter movies. I haven't read the books. Taylor is our resident Harry Potter fan, so I'll let him pipe up.
Yeah, I mean, tisk, right? It's like you said, it's one thing to express your opinion and say, hey, I have a disagreement with J.K. Rowling over her statements, over her positions on this issue. I'm very grateful for her influence in my life and everything that she's done, and like me being able to stand on the shoulders of her creativity. But we just differ on this issue. But we can differ there, and I still respect her, whatever. But instead, he's not only going way beyond that, he's literally taking the place of authority with regard to her works and her intent, and saying she made these stories to convey a reality that she's not living up to or whatever. And it's just like an unreasonable, very short-sighted thing to do. And it seems like he's projecting a little bit too, because he's reading it into the story, this modern political battle, when in reality, the people with dogmatic ideas are the people who are trying to impose this new ideology of gender theory into reality and onto reality. And J.K. Rowling is rightly just standing up for truth.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that she's now become sort of the spokesperson of this issue now, because of how crazily everybody reacted to this. And we're going to recap on something that Daniel Radcliffe in particular decided to do in the wake of J.K. Rowling making these statements. He decided to partner with the Trevor Project and do a little video where he sits down with trans youths. You all know how I feel about the idea of trans youths, okay? But these are individuals who have chosen to transition as minors. We're gonna watch a little clip of that, and then we'll dive a little deeper.
I mean, I learned from, out of the cradle that I am, that I was a boy. I should like blue, I should like sports, I should be manly, I should like superheroes, yeah? And I never associated myself with those things, and we are told that we're not old enough to know this yet. I'm only 11 years old. How do I know I'm a girl? And I need more time to think about this.
But there are also people who do have like a slightly condescending but well-meaning attitude of like, well, people are young, and like, how do we, there is a huge decision. I'd love to hear from all of you about like why we can trust kids to like tell us who they are.
Okay. So a lot of interesting things here, right? I fully believe that Daniel Radcliffe thinks he's doing the right thing when he engages in a project like this and puts out a video like this. And I truly think that he has convinced himself that this is what is good for society and for young people in particular. But if you listen to what that young girl just said, and formerly a boy, now a girl, if you listen to what was just said, she said, I grew up, thinking that I was supposed to like superheroes and sports and, just action figures. Didn't exactly say that, but those are just examples that we can throw into the mix there. And I knew in my heart that I didn't like those things. And you can just see the failure in logic there. There are plenty of boys who don't like superheroes and sports or the color blue. That doesn't mean that we should transition those children to girls. And if that's what you're using as an explanation when talking about your personal transition as a minor, maybe we need to do like a deeper dive into your thinking on that. Maybe we need to push a little further and see if there's room to grow within the body that you were born in. But no, because Daniel Radcliffe was so triggered by what J.K. Rowling said, now we have this Trevor Project special of him endorsing minors transitioning, which it looks all fine and great when you're just sitting down and talking to people about their stories, about how happy they are that they've undergone this process. But what it means is children going through an immense amount of inner turmoil, ending up going through medical transitioning, puberty blockers, hormone therapy. We all know the sex reassignment surgery. You've heard the whole spiel. I'm not going to get into all of this. But him sitting there and using his face to endorse that is a really big deal. It's a really big deal. And all in the wake of J.K. Rowling just trying to stand up for women's rights. Now, we did get some super chats, so I'm going to have to pause here for a second. This first one is from Miss Alexis Dominguez. Thank you so much. It says, I love your content. Congratulations. Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate it. And then from Moderate Thoughts, says, trans people, in my experience, don't feel obligated to stand up for themselves. If you're an adult, you are obligated to defend yourself. You don't need to call the police every time someone utters something you dislike. Why the power play? It's an interesting question. Why the power play? I think it's because in a lot of these sort of ideological bends that we have these days, you either have to agree with everything or you are a bad person. And they want to see bad people be, completely brought down as far as we can possibly bring them. Cancellation, deplatforming, I think even fines in jail in some cases for some of the more extreme people when it comes to trans ideology, leftist ideology, even some, maybe some conservatives. But they truly equate you disagreeing with them ideologically as you being an evil and immoral person. And if you truly believe that, then why would you not, call the speech police on somebody who thinks that trans women are not women? It's about it.
Yeah, it's a worldview that is totally obsessed with the idea of power, because it's like you said, it's this moralized, simplistic worldview. So there's the good people and the bad people, and the good people have to win. There's no negotiating. There's no pluralistic society where people of good faith can disagree about issues but coexist and have to use their speech to come to reasonable agreements on how they can continue to coexist in a society. No, it's my side must win and defeat these evil people, and they must be beaten into submission with power. And I think that that's exactly what we're seeing with this simplistic narrative that reduces the issue to this binary, ironically, because we're all non-binary, right? But with the good guys and the bad guys. And then let's weaponize every institution that we can. Let's do everything that we can to silence those who disagree and validate the experiences of people like detransitioners or women who have lost in sports competitions, etc. Let's press all that down because our ideology must win. It's sort of an end justifies the means mentality.
Yeah, and it creates this great pressure, I think, amongst other people or associated people to denounce you when you decide to speak out against it. And maybe that's a factor with the actors, right? They hear about what's happening to J.K. Rowling, they hear about how much heat she's under, and they decide, well, I'm going to stand on the opposite side of her, regardless of what the facts are in this situation, because I know that that's the side that's going to leave me unscathed in the pending battle that will happen because of what she said. Now, you have Emma Watson, who also decided to speak up. She ended up posting a picture that says trans rights are human rights, and some believe that she did a little dig at J.K. Rowling at the BAFTA Awards when she was brought up and said, I'm here for all the witches, meaning, born witches and those who identify as witches. And that was her way of getting a little subtle dig at J.K. Rowling. Then you have Rupert, who says, I firmly stand with the trans community and echo the sentiments expressed by many of my peers. But he also did come forward at one point, and you can take this however you will, and said, I view J.K. Rowling as an auntie. And sometimes you sit at the dinner table with your aunt and you don't agree with her and you don't stand by, some of her political leanings, but at the end of the day, she is still your auntie. And that I can at least respect. An acknowledgement of, I fully intend to keep a relationship with this woman, even though I disagree with something that she said politically. Because we don't have to completely cut people out of our lives just because they say one thing that we disagree with, even though I think we are often taught the exact opposite, at least in this modern time. You also have Ginny Weasley, who came out and said, I stand by those who are upset at J.K. Rowling, trans women are women. That was just the main line of defense in talking about J.K. Rowling, was just to say trans women are women and trans men are men. And that is what Ginny Weasley, who was played by Bonnie Wright, did. That's what Rupert did. That's what Daniel Radcliffe did. That's what Emma Watson did. Now, we did have one actress, and it's the one who played Luna Lovegood, and I gotta get her name right, Evanna Lynch, who initially came out and said, I don't stand by what J.K. Rowling said. And then, after a little bit of time, came forward and said, you know what, I've given it some thought. She did, allegedly feel quite a bit of pressure to stand on the opposite side of J.K. Rowling on it, and just said, you know what, I realize there's more to the story. I realize that J.K. Rowling is not some sort of ideologue, that she does have facts on her side, that she does have an opinion that is, reasonable, as much as anybody on the opposing side could have an opinion that could be, reasonable. And she came out and said, I was a little too hasty in my opinion on J.K. Rowling. And that I commend. Let's give it a round of applause for Luna Lovegood. Luna does love good after all. So we'll see here. This has all been drummed up again because that guy Graham wrote the article basically calling these actors cowards, which I don't know if I'd go as far as to say that. It really depends on what their motivation is. It truly could be that they are motivated by thinking they're on the right side of history on this one, and thinking that they're doing the right thing, thinking that the science and the research is on their side. And if you're an everyday person right now who's on social media, who's listening to mainstream media or legacy media, whatever you want to call it, I could see how you would be fully convinced that the science, the research, the studies are on your side, that the general public is on your side on this one, and that it is just a small fringe group of people who are trying to attack the quote-unquote LGBT community. So I don't know that I can come forward and call them cowards because I don't know how much information they are privy to. But if they had taken the time to read through what J.K. Rowling has actually said, to go through some of the stuff that she is citing, to actually listen to and, platform her concerns, to me, there is no way you could come out on the other side of it thinking that J.K. Rowling is a hateful transphobe. So either they didn't look into anything that she said, or they did look into it and they are choosing to be ignorant. And in that case, I stand by Graham's sort of conclusion that they are cowards. I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
Yeah, it gives me the same energy as like the people who won't, who completely cut off family members over the vaccine disagreements or whatever it may be, like just political disagreements in general. It's like on the one side of the scale, you have this quasi-familial level relationship that J.K. Rowling had with these actors from childhood, right? Then you also have her creativity. She's a titan in literary history now. Just what she's created is not only something amazing that's going to stand through history, but it also is the very thing that gave you relevance, that gave you fame, that gave you wealth and success. So that's on one side of the scale. And then on top of that is also the merit of her concerns and her arguments and the substance of what she's actually saying. Then on the other side of the scale, you have what? Your need to be on the quote unquote right side of history, your political sort of mentality about this public debate. And as soon as J.K. Rowling came down on the wrong side of something with you politically, that scale was completely tilted in one direction, and you were willing to dispense with all of that on this side just because you have this one disagreement. So much so that you can't even say, look, I respect her, I agree with her or I'm grateful for her for so much of what she's done for me. We just have this disagreement here. It's no, trans women are women, come out with all these sweeping statements and kind of characterize her as someone who's a TERF or whatever it may be. And it just reeks of that same sort of, like we talked about a minute ago, just this totalizing ideology that makes you do unreasonable things and that betrays a level of, we call it ideological possession, where your worldview has just become this very simplistic thing of good and bad, and you lose any ability to have nuance or engage in good faith with people, or respect and show gratitude for people who've gone before you and paved the way for your success.
Yeah, dude. You know what's crazy about it is that, you know, the fact that they still choose to like speak on behalf of the Harry Potter books in the series as if they have like some position of authority that is higher than J.K. Rowling's. And it's interesting because you really have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to characterize her as a horrible person in this argument, which is what many have done. And what makes it even more fascinating to me is that the people who have turned against J.K. Rowling are the people who were once fans of her works, right? So this is a woman who managed to write several works that spoke to something that was seemingly universal in a lot of people when it came to the actual fame of Harry Potter and how many people decided to read these books. Clearly, she had some understanding of like the human condition that she had injected into these books that really made people feel seen and made them feel heard. But as soon as she speaks out on one issue that you disagree with her on, she's a horrible person, she can do no good. I fully believe that if there had been some sort of way for them to legally remove her ownership of the books, they would have done it. And they would have stripped her of the books, all credit with the movies, all credit with the parks, but they were incapable of doing that. They were completely incapable of doing that. And when you have people like this who just get, you know, they try to cancel out of nowhere, you just have to think of them as human beings, because obviously they're human beings. There's something there that you can connect with them on. And I feel the same way about people who are ideologically driven on the left-leaning side of things. There is something there that you can connect with those people on. There's no reason to say this person is wholly morally bad or morally wrong and they should be cast aside due to, you know, X, Y, Z. And the stuff that she experienced in the wake of just saying, I think biological women are women, and I think that trans women are biological men, blows my mind. I mean, she was getting blown up on the internet. She was a trending topic for, I believe, like weeks at a time. She was doxxed, you know, and had her address thrown everywhere. There were activists showing up to threaten her at her house. She was getting death threats sent to her. There were a million things, you know, happening over her just making a simple statement, and a statement that I think 50% of the population would find to be wholly reasonable. And I did decide to listen to the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, that podcast that came out, and I believe that was created by the Free Press. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it detailed some of the turmoil that she's been through in her life in creating this book, being a victim of domestic violence at the hands of a man, writing the Harry Potter books, and eventually when those books came out and started to gain traction, there was a movement and a Christian movement, and I don't know how large this movement actually was throughout the country, but it was making headline news to get her books out of schools because of like the witchcraft and the dark magic and a view about that. They fought those battles. The books went on to prevail, and now you have, you know, trans people or trans activists and leftists saying, oh, well, we shouldn't read Harry Potter anymore, or we should burn the books. There were actual book burnings for the Harry Potter novels after her coming out and acknowledging that biological women are women. It just blows my mind. And I'll read a tweet from J.K. Rowling just so you can get a vibe for the sort of stuff that she talks about intellectually. She tweeted out recently, men defining what a woman is, what women should and shouldn't fear, what women should and shouldn't say, what rights women should be fine with giving up, and of course, what constitutes real misogyny. Get a bloody mirror. That's real misogyny, looking right back at you. And I do want to emphasize, if you look into some of her works and what she's talked about in regard to trans issues, J.K. Rowling is by no means a right-winger. Like, I cannot make that clear enough. She is a progressive, you know, classically liberal person, in my opinion, and I believe in her own personal opinion. So it's very similar to the Jonathan Van Ness story that we covered. For those of you who need filling in on that, Jonathan Van Ness, who is famous for being a gay guy on the show Queer Eye, where they do makeovers, recently did an interview with Dax Shepard, who is an actor. He's married to Kristen Bell. He was on the show Parenthood. And they sat down and had a debate about trans women being able to compete in women's sports. And Dax Shepard, again, another left-leaning, progressive, probably classically liberal individual, said, you know what, I don't agree with trans women being able to compete in women's sports. And because he didn't agree with that, he is now going through a firestorm on the internet, being called a transphobe, a TERF, all these different things. And it's the exact same formula as what's happened with J.K. Rowling. Even though she is very clearly a feminist, even though she very clearly talks about LGBTQ presence in Harry Potter, wasn't she the one who said Dumbledore was gay? Isn't that a thing that happened?
It was a thing that happened, yeah. But there's that's quickly forgotten, I guess. That's so 5 years ago in the virtue signaling world that you're not keeping up with the current right thing. What do they say? The current thing, capital C, capital T. So yeah, no credit to J.K. Rowling for that. But what gives me hope in all this, going back to Evanna Lynch, is her reaction and willingness to, after the initial instinct to side with the current thing and be on the right side of history, quote unquote. Once those settle down, maybe, I don't know if she read more details of the substance of what JK was saying. I don't know if she looked at some of these issues that have been raised by the likes of Riley Gaines and others that have seen some of the harms that pushing this ideology has created, or maybe she thought about her like I was talking about before, just the amount of success and fame and that she owes to J.K. Rowling, and maybe that took into account her personal relationship with her. But she was able to, it gave her enough cognitive dissonance to entertain J.K.'s thoughts and words in good faith, and at least have a more moderate view, and be willing to just say, she didn't come out and say, I totally agree with J.K. Rowling, I'm going to be an activist right alongside her or anything like that. But she was like, you know what, I considered this, and maybe I should have thought it a little more through. And so that gives me hope in all of this. And I think you could look at this conversation we're having right now and say, why so much hand wringing over the opinions of the cast of Harry Potter? Why do you care so much if they are doing this stuff? But I think we need to bear in mind that the proliferation of this ideology does have consequences, and that is what we are trying to prevent, is the harm it creates by moving into women's spaces, by robbing them of their accolades in sports and beauty pageants, and that's just where it starts. Then you get into like custody battles now, where it is in like state of California, they were considering legislation where you could lose custody of your child if you weren't affirming their gender. We've seen men being able to identify as women just to encroach in their spaces in prisons. And all of these things are real world harms that are happening when we become so detached from reality and become ideological. And so even though the face of all of their activism on the part of the cast of Harry Potter is very much like, oh, we're being compassionate and this is all about being nice to people and inclusive and all that, it does have harms, and that is what we are trying to prevent, and that's why we care.
Yeah, and if you look at like what J.K. Rowling tweets out on the issues and all that stuff, she's very much focusing on, legislative issues when it comes to trans issues. She like retweets Riley Gaines talking about the NCAA and setting, certain precedents when it comes to women's sports. She's spoken about, rape cases where a literal biological man has raped a woman and then claimed to be a woman himself. These are important issues, and to be, chastised for bringing light to that and saying, maybe there's an issue here, but kudos to J.K. Rowling, right? Because there was a moment where she was teetering on being canceled, and I think that must have been a very, very stressful time for her. But by virtue of having the platform that she's built and such a just widely known name and so much respect that she has just sort of built up over the decades of doing the work that she's done, she was able to get out of this uncanceled. And there are few people, I think, who truly have the power to go through this and come out, higher on the other end of it. And that's always something to note, that you know, when you have a huge audience like this, it does make it easier for you to make statements like that. And it's not so easy for the people whose daily lives are going to be affected by this and nobody's ever going to hear a peep about it. But still, kudos to her for saying, you know, this is a huge literary legacy that I have, and that is turned into a Hollywood legacy that's turned into, you know, the amusement parks and all of these different things. And she was willing to put all of that on the line to just tell the truth. That's it. So, I mean, I can't commend her enough for that. I'm curious to see if we do hear from Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, any of these individuals in response to the, you know, scathing review of their activity that Graham put out on Daily Mail and on the Telegraph.